today we're chatting to Rahmon, the co-founder and CEO of Loud Parade, working in and across the music industry, winning awards and working with some of the biggest brands in the world to redefine and reshape what it looks like to be a music artist and to get incentivized and rewarded for your artistic works in the music industry, and helping brands to leverage those people in that industry to work together. And what you'll notice about Rahmon is that he's got fantastic energy. The way he shows up, he's very giving, very kind, and very disciplined as well. We talk about some very specific traits in showing up as a leader. His mindset and advice to me has always been really, really important. He likes to give back to the ecosystem. Before being a founder in this space, he was also in the VC space. So we talk about everything from music to marketing to personal to leadership to VC and how that impacts leaders in business and so much more. So you can expect all of that coming up right now. How have you been keeping? What's new with you?
Yeah, man, I'm really, really good. I guess my head is into the future, as I've reflected on this year. I'm excited for what's next. It's been a really interesting year, lots of ups and downs, lots of lessons as well, but built some great connections. And yeah, I think the foundations are set for a lot of the business moves that we've been looking at. And now it's time to level up, really.
What have those ups and downs been? Paint us a picture of the exciting, but also the challenging.
100%. So as someone who runs a business, naturally there are ups and downs. And yeah, I think a lot of the ups and downs are related to people. So it could be anything from, you wanted that big meeting and then that gets moved and you're waiting 6 months. And even though it sounds like a small deal, if you got it in that moment, that time you thought was right, that could have been a window of opportunity that you've missed, right?
Yeah.
So those sorts of things where you want to be in control, like you start a business, obviously to make a difference, but because you want to actually have some input on this ever-changing world and have some control over it, a little piece of control, just a little. And when things are out of your control, sometimes you have to step back and be like, you know what, it wasn't meant to be at that moment. So I had a lot of those this year. But then equally, on the other end, had a lot of opportunities that have just come out of nowhere and we've been prepared. Success is opportunity and preparation combined, right? So because we're prepared for that moment, when it comes in, you snatch it out of whoever's hands. You're like, yes, please. So yeah, I think it balances out in the end.
I love it. Who is that client that was keeping you waiting for 6 months?
Which one? There's so many.
Multiple.
Look, so just to paint a picture of what we do. So obviously we're in the music and advertising industries, two very flaky industries, to be honest with you.
Defined by flakiness.
Yeah,
people are flaky, or
I think it's just the environment is very fast paced.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, being in music, naturally, things are always changing, people always releasing. Artists by nature are very free people. They're not people who are rigid, and you have to understand that and accommodate to that. And I think we do that very well, actually, for a running business. And then in advertising, brand decision makers are constantly being bombarded with new concepts, new ideas, new opportunities, new trends. Putting out fires, that's a phrase that I keep hearing every week, right? There's always something going on or something going wrong. So yeah, I think for us, at least making sure that the people we're trying to speak to know we add value is going to be the key way to get in the room with them. I think time is so limited now. These are good people. They're just so time poor that, once you have that opportunity, you have to make it count. I take it very seriously, actually.
Okay, there's a couple of things I want to come back to there, but first I'd like to start by helping us paint a picture of the person we're speaking to and who they really are. And on an old rendition of this show years ago, this show now is kind of a reimagining of something I did a long time ago. And the first question I would always ask, tell me about your childhood. And I do notice that, we are shaped by these in ways that make so much sense looking back. What was your upbringing like? What was your life like growing up? And how do you think it's led to the things you're executing on now?
Yeah, so looking back, I've always been grateful for my childhood. It was filled with a lot of love. Only child, so yeah, a lot of attention.
Yeah,
and
me
sometimes,
too.
yeah, I know,
Only
right?
child gang.
It's
I love
only
it.
child syndrome, right? But
Yeah.
people always say to me, "Oh, I'm surprised you're an only child because I'm so generous." Like they say, "Oh, if you're an only child, normally you're a bit of an attention seeker." And I'm a Leo as well. But all
Damn,
these
cool.
titles, these are just things that human beings use to like put ourselves in boxes. But ultimately, we're individuals, right? I'd like to believe. But yeah, I mean, childhood was great in the sense of like lots of love. You know, my grandma is Nigerian. My mum was born here, also Nigerian, and then I was born here. So I guess you've got that kind of British London upbringing, but then those African customs and values, which are big on like education, respect, pride. Respect for elders is a big thing, and just authority as well. But then that can go two ways. That can make people challenge authority, or it can make them quite subservient. I think I've always challenged authority in a way through my mind and intellect, you know, not through being disrespectful, but through achievement. That's kind of my way of like getting back.
Oh, that's
like, oh, you're trying to
interesting.
teach me? Okay, I'm going to smash this thing you're teaching me, you know, and be the best at it that you can't even criticize it.
Did that ever become a weight? Did that ever put you through stress or pressure?
So much stress. So I was a straight A star student, like straight through. I was like, yeah, I'm not dropping a grade. And that pride, and that's something that I held myself accountable for. And to be honest, looking back, like grades didn't actually matter, but they were everything in that moment. And I think when I was younger, I was a little more competitive with my peers. Now I've realized we're all on our own journeys. But back then I went to an all boys school, you know, rumors would go around of who flopped in the class, you know. Looking back, it's kind of mean, but it was playful at the time. And those sorts of things really shape you. And I played a lot of sports growing up as well. So that mentality of winning, being in a team, camaraderie, all of these things and values that I didn't realize were shaping me and helped me in the world of business. But childhood-wise, like a big opportunity came for me when I was in like year 5, year 6, where I went to like a normal sort of state school, but I had the opportunity to go to a private school. I got like a scholarship for the last few years of like primary, which changed everything for me and realized that, you know what, this academic pursuit that I'm on could actually benefit me and be rewarded. Because usually it's not rewarded. A lot of these smart kids, because of the environments they're coming from, they fall into quite a bad way. They go into bad crowds. And sometimes they use that intellect towards things they shouldn't. Do you know what I mean? So
can you give us examples?
Drugs, you know, violence, gangs.
As in
because of the
taking
environment
ownership of that space. So it's like trying to break out of that
100%
labeling and physical environment as well that they were born
into.
No,
I think so. I think kids are smarter than people realize. I think now we're older and we've got TikTok and social media, we're realizing how exposed kids are. But even back in the day, before those platforms were readily available, kids are always finding a way to be naughty. I'm just on the bus or on the train, I'm just seeing these kids just being mischievous. And sometimes you laugh and smile at it because it's like a childlike innocence, but it's quite a fine line that it can turn into something a bit uncontrollable. And I think my family are very aware of that, and I was hyper aware of that. And I think the people you keep around you are important too. Luckily, the people around me recognized I was smart, but I should use that for good, and they encouraged me to use that for good rather than not good. Because honestly, there are a lot of scenarios where I know what the bad thing is, but my morals and the way I've been brought up and that whole thing of pride and respect and honor has held me back and said, you know what, I'm going to go the right path. But I very much knew what the wrong path was and how to get away with it as well.
Okay, you saw that path in front of 100%. You, and it's the active choice not to go down it.
And people as well are going down that path. But you're like, you know what? Nah, this would make my family proud. Or no, I've worked too hard for this. Or no, there's another way. Yeah. You know, that's an active choice to say no to the people you think are cool, the people who are influencing you to go the other direction. I've had to do that a lot of times, particularly when I was younger.
There's a really strong sense of these values that you have. To outline them really clearly, what would you say your top values are?
Ooh. I think the concept of love is important. It kind of makes the world go round, as cheesy as it sounds. But in the sense of like, obviously, as humans, we're quite self-interested, but I think you get what you give. So if you give out love, if you give out positive energy, if you speak positively, eventually you'll start to see the world in that frame and things will get better for you. And it takes a lot of discipline to do that. I think that's another value of mine, discipline. like being committed to a cause. I think in life, it's very easy to be short term and very myopic, but for me, it's about the long term and staying disciplined towards a certain goal. And I think that comes from my obsession with sports, obsession with craft as well. We'll get into music, I'm sure. Like these sorts of things, you have to dedicate and practice. So I think that's another value as well. And I think just like building as well, like building together, community. Obviously we're all on our own individual paths, but we can actually help each other out and make this very difficult life a lot easier when it's shared. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a picture you're almost painting a little bit of like an alternate timeline Rahmon who didn't value these things as much. What do you think your life would look like if you had a different set of values or you didn't value these things as highly as you do now? You took them very seriously, and as a result, you made active decisions. But what if you made different decisions? What if you didn't hold these values so dear? What do you think the difference would be?
Honestly, it sounds quite dramatic, but potentially fatal. I'll give you quite a deep example. So I had a friend who was literally my best friend in those primary years before I moved to the other school. And unfortunately, he went down the wrong path and ended up in gang violence and died sadly. And this is someone I used to hang out with all the time. Do you know what I mean? And he was probably just as smart as me, to be honest, in terms of just his pure intellect. But that mischievous streak almost went too far, and it was exploited by people who were older, who saw an opportunity to get him involved in drugs, gangs, these sorts of things. Maybe looking back, his moral or religious or cultural compass wasn't as strong as mine, if I had to really be honest, but he was a good person at heart. He just was swayed into the wrong things, and we came from the same environment.
So
I think
people are
exactly
fundamentally,
I'd like to think that.
We operate on this level of mind that if someone knows how to manipulate, let's use that word, that mind just takes over, goes down, and it gets used to seeing a very particular paradigm, a very particular frame of view of the world.
Especially when that bad behavior is rewarded. Sometimes I feel in life like good behavior isn't rewarded immediately. Obviously, you might have that dopamine hit, that feeling of feeling good inside. But I think sometimes in the long run, it's the good behavior that's rewarded. But the bad behavior is rewarded instantaneously when you think about it in this society, sadly.
Oh, that's really
When you think of things like manipulation or capitalism, like making people feel bad, I don't know, something I've been thinking about a lot is sugar intake. Like immediately you feel great, but maybe an hour, 2 hours later, the crash comes or you get a headache or whatever. So like in this life, I found a lot of the time, short term, the bad seems good, but in the long term, good will always reign, you know?
We are very short-term creatures,
yes.
Right? Humans are very short-term. Or we're wired to go after, especially talking about certain examples survival. Like sugar. We're in that survival. The body just takes over first. How do you keep going through the initial pain point of doing the harder thing, so to speak, right? If essentially delayed gratification is what you're aware you're going for, how did you first start to adopt that perspective and understand that? And then what do you do now to keep up with that?
Yeah, so I think your 5 friends around you can say a lot about you. Luckily, I've curated my circle to be very ambitious, hungry, driven, young as well. Obviously, I have older mentors, but sometimes it's easier to relate to people who are young like you and they're trying to figure it out too, and you can kind of bounce ideas off each other. So I think having good influences around me and trying to inspire the circle around me and realizing that this story is bigger than myself has really held me accountable and grounded me. I think it's very easy to get lost. It's very easy to be selfish. But if you have people who you respect who can check you and be like, oh, I didn't like that comment, or the attitude there wasn't right, or the approach wasn't right, or, people that can actually hold you accountable and you can do the same because you respect each other.
Okay.
That is really important.
Yeah.
People that can actually be honest with you who aren't your parents.
Yeah. When you say this story is bigger than you, what do you mean? What story?
So the way I look at it, like as a young black man from Southeast London, there are certain stereotypes that are attached to that. And I make it my daily mission to break that and show that there's another route and another path.
Okay.
Because these things have been ingrained in society, these stories, right, about what it's to be, what is that identity. But I don't want to be defined by those rules. I think there's a lot more that one can do, especially at a time like now where we have the internet, we have AI, we have music, there's so much talent and opportunities out there. I think the constantly reinforced narrative that's quite a negative stereotype of people who come from where I come from should cease to exist. And I'm going to be a living embodiment of that. That's not me saying I'm perfect, but it's definitely understanding that there's a narrative that's been crafted and I'm going to craft a new narrative and a new way of moving forward. That's how I look at it.
I love it. How did you decide to start crafting that? Because you had to have, this is why I asked about these values, you had to know what you were aspiring to be, and you had to understand how that would change the narrative. Where did you gain that perspective? At what point did you go, oh, this is the me I want to give to the world?
Yeah. So the way that's been framed is like it's a conscious decision, but I think constantly being put in certain situations or hearing certain things or being fed certain lies by the media, seeing things around you, observing the world, that rebellious streak comes out in my actions. Because people talk a lot, right? And yeah, I may say these affirmations to myself, but I think how I hold myself accountable is, are my actions representing the man I want to be? That's really important. So yeah, I've had moments in my life that have inspired that rebellion. People might put you down, people might dismiss you. They may not even verbally dismiss you, but them being, I don't know, an hour late to a meeting and you're just sat there and you're like, wow, I prepared this whole morning for this and I'm just a mosquito to this guy. Like, move. You know what I mean? Like,
working in your industry, that does happen a lot.
No, there's a lot of ego and we'll get into that. Things like that can make you think, oh, I want him to remember. And that might sound vengeful, but I've channeled that vengeful energy into something positive. It's like, I want him to remember in the sense of regret that he didn't give me a chance initially.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I get that. I do that all the time. And I'm like, sometimes I'm really actually almost annoyed at myself for doing it because I'm like, is this where I want my energy to go? And because it's a fine line between it being in this like negative and being vengeful, as you would say, or being angry about it, and between that and then you cross this line into I'm just gonna focus on where I do want to go as a result of that.
Yeah,
it's a fine line.
And it requires
a small
discipline.
step. Okay, so talk to us about this discipline, because I think this is a key part of this picture that is your life. Is you notice these things and you decided to leverage them, use them, and apply them, despite the fact that there was no immediate gratification. And this comes down to the principle that we hear about more increasingly in business, which is it's not about motivation, it's about discipline, right? Motivation is this emotional short-term thing. Exactly. Discipline is the right habits and the right perspectives and to
the
really,
little things.
Exactly. So how did you build that discipline? In fact, even before that, when did you notice this discipline would be important? And then how did you build it so that you could actually continue showing up in the way you wanted to?
I think when I was younger, I was very disciplined when it came to education. So my mum put me in like Saturday schools and stuff like that. So like, I guess it came from her initially. Every weekend when other kids were playing and stuff. And it sounds cruel now, but I actually enjoyed it. I enjoyed that academic attainment. I enjoyed the fact that the stuff I was learning in my main school, I'd learned it a week before, that advantage that I was getting. Because in life, like just as a black man from Southeast London, like I've been given, well, on paper, right? It's a disadvantage, but that's been flipped into a superhero power. Do you know what I mean? And then that's been nurtured by going to an environment where being curious was encouraged. I think a lot of the time with young people or kids, we dismiss them rather than try and answer their questions. Or as an adult, you can just say, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? And have a discussion and think critically. I think those skills are being taken away from young people. So yeah, to be encouraged to think critically, to be encouraged to challenge authority respectfully, but understand more, that really helped. And yeah, just that consistency in education initially, I think is what helped. Studying, revising, writing out my notes, these sorts of things, I think that helped. And then sports, as I mentioned, played a huge role in my life in terms of watching my favorite athletes, my favorite teams, how well they did. That didn't just come from anywhere. Obviously, there was a God-given talent, but if hard work doesn't, merge with that talent, they're not really going to go that far. So I think sports and academia really showed me you can benefit from being consistent and disciplined as well.
There are some people I've noticed who get that we could call a dopamine hit from being disciplined, even if the result of the discipline hasn't shown up yet. In other words, I wonder if we can train ourselves to enjoy executing on the work, even if the work hasn't achieved anything for us yet.
Yeah, I've tried things like this. For me, it's more physical exercise. I've seen that.
Okay.
But yeah, I've tried that kind of thing. Jury's still out.
Okay.
But for me, it doesn't matter because I'm going long term with this,
Yeah.
and I'm seeing the archetype and I'm seeing the path that others have taken who have been just as disciplined, if not more so, and how that's benefited them. And don't get me wrong, like I still enjoy the small wins. Like they really mean a lot to me. I think sometimes with our work, sometimes people can play it down. It's always cooler to be like, oh yeah, it wasn't that deep. No, this is that deep. Getting that meeting booked in was that deep. Presenting really well and smashing that pitch was that deep. That's my equivalent of winning the penalty shootout. That's how I'm looking at it. And that's what gives me the hit. And then I'd say on top of that, camaraderie and teamwork, working with a co-founder, working with certain clients, partners, when a project goes really well, that feeling of everyone pitched in and you contributed to that wider goal, wider vision is a really special feeling, I'd say.
Yeah, and I think other people pick that up too. Although one of the things I'm trying to figure out is why some people take these things you're describing very seriously and some people don't. Why do we not see the benefit unless we've had some of the experiences that you've had? Because in a way, you've had the experience, you've had the first-hand view of what happens if I don't show up this way. Have you heard this study that was done, which essentially translates to this like thought experiment? So if I were to say to you, run a 5K and I'll give you £100, the average person would be X percentage likely to do it. If you said run this 5K or I'll take £100 from you, they'd be much more likely to do it. The average person. We're much more motivated by losing something we already have than by gaining something new that we don't. And so I wonder if the reason you take it so seriously is because you're motivated by the gain, where most people are only motivated unless they think they're going to lose something.
That's fascinating. I think, there's so much to gain, and it's not necessarily monetary. I'm like, it's kind of like the whole curious thing. It's academic, intellectual stimulation is what I crave. Like, it's just pushing that boundary, innovating, trying something new, something fresh, creating a brand, creating a story. I'm obsessed with storytelling. I think that's all part of it. And I think I'm basically writing the chapters each time I do it. That's how I feel like. I'm taking control back and ownership of, like I said, this world that feels so chaotic and you just feel like you're an ant, you feel like you're a cog. But being able to book that meeting in, being able to smash that pitch, that's me taking back a little bit of that control and rewriting that narrative.
I love it. Before we start talking about the work itself, there's one more thing you mentioned that I really want to pick up on, which is this concept of being on your own journey. We are all on journeys that are non-comparable to basically anyone else, because little things will completely affect us. Upbringing, where we were born, all kinds of like societal circumstances. But we do live in a world which is
shared
comparison mindset. We when I'm thinking about my personal brand to build and content and things, I'm making comparisons to other people. Now, you can start with just like a competitor analysis, right? And that's like a healthy level. And then it very quickly descends for many of us, unfortunately, into something I think is really unhealthy. But what's your perspective on kind of comparing yourself to others, why we do it, and how to start to overcome it?
Yeah, loaded question. I would
I
say
I like those.
no, that's good. I like them as well. I think it's human nature to compare or want to have a reference point. I think everyone has a different risk appetite. Me personally, in business, I like to explore the unadventured and be a pioneer and innovate and try and come up with something a bit fresh and a bit new. But I get why some people might want to have a look at what's been done before and iterate from there. I mean, if you look at art, they say like good artists copy, great artists steal. And I'm sure we'll get into it when as we get into music. And there's so much in that. It's so loaded. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with being inspired by others. There's nothing wrong with iterating on what's been done in the past and actually showing respect to your forefathers or foremothers. Like I'm very big on like there's lineage and you have to show that respect. But at the same time, it's a new generation, you know, and there are new opportunities. And yeah, to really stand out from the crowd where it's so noisy, you've got to think different. And yeah, some of the best innovations have come from that mindset of thinking different. You think of Apple, that's literally their tagline or their initial tagline, right? So yeah, I think it's very easy in life to compare. Business-wise, I haven't really done that. I'd say more personal life, maybe.
Yeah.
But in terms of like business-wise, like looking to my left, looking to my right, and thinking, oh, they've got this client or they've done this song or this activation. I look at it, I'm like, bet. Like,
Yeah.
cool. Like, all right.
You know what, I've heard this a few times now, and it's the perspective I adopted a few years ago, is like your competitors in business are only ever useful so that you can learn something really constructive and practical and then like move on.
Yeah, move
Getting too absorbed in what they're doing is you giving your energy to them instead of to yourself.
Your own business, yeah.
There's,
it's destructive, not constructive.
One of the things I do is I train entrepreneurs to pitch to investors, and was running a workshop once, and we get to the slide in someone's pitch deck where they've got their like competitors on like a sheet. I'm sure you've seen this a whole bunch of times. This axis, exactly. And someone was like, why put anyone else's logo on your deck? And I was like, this is such a good point. You know what I mean? So I just wonder why, because you separate business and personal. I think a lot of us don't now, because business is personal. My business is my success because I am the CEO and founder of blank, and your identity is all caught up in it. So I guess how we remove ourselves from that and then only compare in both of those realms, only compare ourselves where useful, I think is a really practical exercise we need to get better at. But what's your perspective?
That's something and the reason I said it is because it's something I'm actively doing every single day. I'm trying to create boundaries between my personal life, my family, my friends, and my business. And it's the hardest thing ever because I'm so obsessed with my business. It's like my little baby, right? But at the same time, I created that business. Or we created it, I should say. Like, that's a part of me. It's an extension of me. It isn't me. But at the same time, because it's an extension of me, a lot of my identity is tied into it and wrapped around it. And a lot of people know me because of the business, and they'll continue to know me. But something I say to myself is like, I will continue to create multiple, and I have created successful and good businesses before this business, and I will do that after this business. So once I take a step back and remind myself of that, and it's just the tenets of this business that make me me, that's when I feel more power. I do not want to be consumed by it, because if something goes wrong, as it does in business all the time, I can't go wrong. I can't malfunction because the business is having a bad day. In fact, the business needs me to be healthy, good state of mind, positive, so that I can nurture it. Literally.
Exactly. It's the other way around, right? It's like if you're in a bad place, the business will be in a bad place.
100%.
In a small business, you very often are the business.
Exactly. So I think me understanding that, and I only came to that realization quite recently, and taking active steps. And I'm still going because, taking breaks I really struggle with, but I realized that I come back renewed, refreshed, and energized. So but going back to the comparison point, it is totally human nature to be jealous for like 2 seconds. But then it's so destructive to let that jealousy or envy or whatever it is consume you. Like, let it be constructive and inspiring rather than destructive. It doesn't really serve you. Having said that, though, it's important to be aware. Let's not be naive. Like, competition is a thing. We are in a capitalist world. Particularly, I've seen recently, having gone out to the States for a while now, how it is dog eat dog, and you have to be aware, and people will snake you, people will do certain things. But as long as you have your moral compass in check, you should be okay. You know, I think ultimately, if you're doing something great, like the fruits of your labor will show eventually. You just have to think a bit more long term.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know who you want to be in 10 years?
Oh, what will the world be like in 10 years?
Good question.
Will there be a world in 10 years?
Let's not get into that. Let's not get too left.
Do you know
but,
what I mean?
Or we can later. But regardless of the world, you can't change the world so much as you can change your world, i.e. yourself.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's the reason I ask is because we have one person that is worth comparing ourselves to, and that's ourselves in the future.
That's true.
So we can work backwards and go, who do I really want to be? Am I really thinking about and actively acting on the way I think I need to show up to actually achieve being the person I want to be in the future? So I just wonder if you've thought about that.
I've definitely thought about that. I think a lot of those thoughts are more personal than business related, because I don't know what business. It could be an AI business. It could be whatever. You know, remember when NFTs were a thing? Like,
I mean, they're still technically a thing.
True. But you get what I mean.
Absolutely.
Like, I don't know what industry I'll be in.
Yeah.
I'd say I've done it like in 5 years' time, work-wise. Like I think it's the education thing. I've wanted to change the education system, like some sort of innovation in that space. I think if you can get kids when they're young versus when they're a bit older, their ways are set in stone, then you can really make long-lasting generational change. So there's something in that, I think. But in terms of just who I want to be in future, someone who gives and helps, I think that's really important. I get a lot of fulfillment from that, whether it's advice, stories, investment, whatever it is. Do you know what I mean? Giving opportunities, particularly where I didn't have them. I think that's really valuable and important. Like, you can't really call it progress if the next generation of founders is going through if they're going through the same issues we're going through, then what have we done as a community and a collective? So hopefully guiding the next generation, which sounds strange because I am young, but honestly, these kids coming up, it's exciting to see how hungry they are and how ambitious they are. And when I was a kid, like, you were trained to be like a doctor, a lawyer, whatever, and those are still respectable careers that are the bedrock of our society, sure. But now you're seeing kids say they want to be a content creator, they want to be an entrepreneur. And that, to me, that change is really exciting. So let's guide them in the right way so they do it responsibly.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was a kid, you know, it was still, what do you want to be when you're older, when you're really little? And it's like firefighter, police, you know what I mean? Whatever. And because these are really respectable roles, and I think this is the first time in a very long time in this kind of modern society that we live in, that's changed. That anything that wasn't those fundamental things is now shifting. Our generation realized that those things were not a lie, but overblown a little bit. The next generation, younger than us, was never taught the lie in the first place.
They
or
skipped
doesn't
the
seem
lie.
to be. Exactly. So they've gone straight to what we figured out in our probably our early 20s. You know what I mean?
think it's the representation as well. With the rise of TikTok, social media platforms, people are seeing new stories that were, to be honest, I think they were snuffed a bit. I don't know, I'm a bit cynical in the sense of the way stories are pushed out and crafted, because I am a storyteller, so I know exactly how this works. And there's a reason why those things were pushed out. And it was an element of control and an element of de-risking and making things feel safe. As a kid, like, you don't want to tell a kid to do certain roles. You know, you want them to do like the safe roles that they're familiar with, the people they see, like in the street, policemen, whatever. Do you know what I mean? So encouraging kids to do slightly dangerous or more risky roles. I don't know how that looks like as a parent, but it's very safe to be like, oh yeah, just be a policeman. Yeah. It just dumbs it down.
These roles aren't very safe.
Well,
firefighter is like one of the
like
economically safe.
safe.
Like, you know, the society will always need
respect
them,
and need you. They're evergreen.
Yeah,
yes,
you're
yes,
right.
yes.
So let's talk a little bit about stories then. When you think about storytelling, what is most important to you? What comes to your mind, and how do you craft the stories you tell?
Yeah, so for me, storytelling is about the message. And yeah, sometimes the story doesn't always have to be a happy story, but it's truth. I think it's about the spreading of truth, particularly in an era like this where truth is so murky. And it's like, what is truth? How is that defined? You know, and identity comes into that a lot. But for me, like storytelling is living and telling your truth such that it can be something to someone else. You know, you're passing it on, you're spreading a message. And the reason why I love storytelling so much and why I'm passionate about my current business, which is a music business, a music creative agency, is I truly believe like music is one of the most powerful forms of storytelling. I always think about how much emotion is wrapped into a 2.5 minute song. Like, how can this song, like wedding songs, for example, how can certain wedding songs be the song of a generation for so many love stories? Like, that is incredible to me that someone can actually craft that and create that feeling, that shared common feeling in a world where there's so much divide, so much difference, but in a piece of music, people can feel united. Or even in a concert, like there's certain artists that they look a certain way. You look at their crowd, you're like on paper, this doesn't make sense, but people are all unified and brought together by that storytelling, you know? So yeah, storytelling as a whole is like spreading truth or your truth, spreading a message, happy or sad. But music in particular, that made me really lock in when it came to storytelling because I saw how emotive it was.
Do you think that music and the way it's disseminated now is the modern day version of sitting around the campfire?
Ooh, that's interesting.
This just came to my mind what you were saying. So this is a very nascent thought, but I'm thinking, like, the reason we love stories is because it's theorized this is how we evolved to be more than essentially the middle of the food chain, which is what we probably were for many hundreds of thousands of years. We then evolved to the top. We label it as being because of like technology, right? We built like spears so we could hunt bigger animals than us and whatever. But actually it was the ability to tell stories. You know, don't go down there because there's a lion. Well, what if one of the men in the village wants to prove themselves? Now it's actually, he might just go die and that doesn't serve anyone. But what if there's an angry spirit down there? That's a story.
That's a story.
And it changes the game completely.
It's more powerful.
Stories are what have allowed wars to take place. They're against us. That's a story. That allows a nation to unify. How many unified, peaceful nations do we now have? Because at one time there wasn't peace because of a story.
There you go.
So much has happened because of stories. Now we've used music around the campfire for a very long time. But the way music is now created and disseminated is totally different.
Absolutely.
If I think about the way politics is right now, it's very polarized.
Yep.
But like you just said, some people bring audiences together that are totally different. And actually, now that I think about it, listening to what you just said, that only really seems to happen in music. It doesn't happen in schools. It doesn't happen in local physical communities. It doesn't happen online at all. Online is the worst.
Yeah, it's the worst.
Except for music.
Yeah.
This is really interesting.
It's so powerful. And when I noticed that, I was like, oh, this is a gift. Like, this is really, really strong. And it's something that, for good, like I look at things like We Are the World and back in the day, like they used to do these benefit songs. And as cheesy as these things were, like you had like the Avengers of artists all coming together, like, and using all of their influence and their fan base to actually come together for some cause. And it is quite political when you think about it, but people are political, right? For me, like music, seeing how powerful it's been in my life and how it's helped me to get through pain sometimes as well, that's something I'm like, brands should be using this, you know? There's huge opportunities. And I think now with the way music is, I'm going to be honest, like the value of music has definitely decreased a bit because of its accessibility through platforms like Spotify, Apple Music. But I still think the musical experience, whether it's theatre, concerts, is one of the most powerful things that human beings experience together.
Yeah. One of the things I've started doing recently with the show, which requires more manual editing, but I think it's a higher quality product, so I do it anyway, is to manually take the clips I make and add background music. You can kind of do that on like Instagram and stuff directly, and TikTok, some of these platforms you're working with. But if I use like a third party tool and it doesn't allow music, and I realize actually it feels a bit flat.
Yes,
as a result.
Yeah.
So I need to take it out and do some manual work, but I think it's worth it, and it's for this reason you mentioned. Music seems to be the thing that has broken through the psychological miasma of just messiness and division that we've created now.
It brings harmony, and there are actual studies that show like there's a limbic effect. So a part of your brain that lights up when you hear a piece of music. And they actually say music can be quite healing, like when you're going through stress or pain. And some people even use music when they're studying. So when I look at music, you look at like the Mozart days, and that was kind of like, it was almost like a flex in society. It's like the opera, like the top people got to experience that level of musician and stuff. But now Spotify has literally made it like a kid on the bus can just listen to whatever song in history. I think that's insane. That accessibility and democratization is exciting, but it has had huge implications for artists, which is something I'm fighting for, you know, to make it fairer through what we do at Loud Parade.
So let's talk a little bit then about music as an industry, because if that's how important it is for, let's say, the soul, right? An individual human, the industry then needs to find a way of capitalizing on that, which can create opportunities and positive experiences. It can also create a lot of challenges. Give us your overview of the industry and where the state of the music industry is at right now.
Honestly speaking, it's a mess.
Nice. Point, period, end of podcast.
It's an absolute mess. And if you speak to most people in music at all levels, from the artists to the labels, to the managers, to the indie artists, they would say it's a mess for a few reasons. So music's a bit of a funny one where there's music, as we said, really ethereal, soulful, beautiful, magical, pure. And there's the music industry, which is modern day exploitation. And most people in music would agree with me in saying this. It's an industry where there's no real infrastructure. So it's whoever's most powerful creates the rules. And typically you'll find that artists aren't actually the most powerful. They're the most talented, but they're not the most powerful. And sometimes they don't realize their power until much later on in their careers. But in order to get to that point, they've had to give up so much IP. They had to give up so much mental health wise. They've had to give up so much in terms of abuse of substances or whatever, just to get to that point, because the industry is such a mess. There's no protections, there's no HR, so to speak. So yeah, when you look at the industry like that, you're like, wow. And then when you look at the actual infrastructure that's in place, it's so controlled by three big entities, and it has since the beginning of time. Sony, Warner, Universal. They control music. Like, they literally own so much of it. So how are you really meant to disrupt and innovate when you have those three major players that are so dominant? In any other industry, the Competition Commission would have like broken it up or figured something out. Again, I hate name dropping companies, Ticketmaster, Live Nation, like these are monopolies and oligopolies. Any other industry, I think something would have been done, but because it's music and it has this whole thing of, oh, it's creative and it's free, man. Like that kind of effect. People are just like, yeah, let them get on with it. Let the music people deal with that. And what we're finding is a lot of artists are struggling. And then when it comes to music discovery, and again, there's this whole debate in music, like, are you a music snob? Are you not? I was thinking about this the other day in the shower. I was like, jazz was like the hip hop of its time, in the sense of like the older crowd were like, what's this jazz stuff? We want to listen to classical or whatever. And then rock became that as well. Like, yo, why are these people screaming on the track? Whereas the young people, punk rather, or whatever you want to define it as, like, that was like the voice of that young generation. Like, we are feeling so marginalized. We're going to put all this angry energy into this movement and it's ours and we can reclaim it. So every generation has like this sound that kind of represents that rebellion, that their parents are like, turn that stuff off, drill music, you know? And what always happens is it gets demonized by society. But you know what that does? It makes it cooler and more attractive, and it becomes a sub-community. So yeah, seeing that music isn't just the sound, but it's also a cultural movement, and it's a very powerful cultural movement. Like, look at the word culture, cult, you know? That means people are really behind it, like they're willing to die for it almost.
How have I never figured that out
Deep
before?
It, you know? Words
That's
are
so
power.
smart. Yeah,
so yeah, when you see that music is more than just a sound, but also a cultural movement, you understand its power, and the business people get that. And most of the big innovations in music have come from tech people. Like Spotify is a technology business, an advertising business that leverages music rights. Because if you obviously don't have premium, you're hearing those ads. And that's what brands are paying for that exposure. So yeah, when I started to break down the industry and understand it, I realized it's ripe for change and how much power it has. But the powers that be have to almost endorse you changing it. And that's why we're very collaborative despite wanting to disrupt, we respect the game. And it goes back to my personal values of you have to respect your forefathers. You have to respect the people that have created that frame, even if you're about to disrupt it.
Yeah. Have you seen this this thing? So it gets said a lot about our generation, like young people don't want to work.
Yeah, people say
no
that.
one wants to work anymore.
Yeah,
So do you know what? There's been a meme going around where someone went through and found snippets of text saying the exact same words from the 80s and then the 60s and then the 50s and then the 30s and then the 1890s. People, almost every generation thinks that no one wants to work anymore.
Yeah.
And every single generation it's untrue. And I wonder if it's kind of the same with music. When you talk about these different generations, these culturally defining shifts for each generation, music is the conduit through which a generation kind of finds its voice.
Exactly.
And the other generations don't like it, but every generation doesn't like the most recent generation finding their voice, which is really strange because they had to find their voice somehow.
Literally, because people forget the struggle. They forget. I think maybe as you get older, I don't want to use terms like liberal or whatever, but that's the only word I can use to kind of express what I'm saying. Is like, as you get older, maybe you get less liberal. You kind of, the world takes its weight on you and you conform to societal norms, and you can't just be out there protesting or being free or smoking or whatever stereotypes they put on the younger generation. And I think that's what it is. And there's that kind of scorn.
And maybe it's like jealousy.
Yeah, it's a slight bit of jealousy. Like, oh, I had my time and I didn't do it, man.
The thing, that's interesting. I wondered, my initial assumption would be that people's definitions changed over time. So if I was a liberal in the 80s, I might be considered conservative by today's standards.
Ooh, yeah, that's
so the definition changes as the majority, the people who are the ones leveraging the term start to change what that term means to them. It's like, I use this example most often is the word woke. So what's the definition of the word woke?
What, you're asking me to, how do you define it? Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
This is kind of my point, is you'll hear people on one side of the table, quote unquote, being like, woke is great, woke is the best thing ever. If someone isn't woke, they're immediately like racist, sexist, whatever. The other side, who are just like vehemently against that. And I realized, how do we know you're both talking about the same thing?
Literally.
Because no one's agreed on this definition of this word.
Yeah.
I've got a whole thing I'd go into about that, which I won't for today's, but my point is like, your definition of something is whatever your reality is. Reality to you is whatever you think reality is.
Absolutely.
So your reality might not be reality, but to you, you don't know any different. So to you, it is reality. And so I just find it really interesting to use music as this example for realizing this, because there are some examples that, people are too identified with. They won't get it, right? Some people are too identified with being woke or anti-woke, to use that example I just did, to be able to listen to a more nuanced argument. But with music, we all have our stories about how music's affected us.
Yeah, because it's so broad as well, because I'm very conscious that this is a very Western conversation right now.
Yeah, it's
what about in Africa, for example, or even religiously speaking, the importance of music, whether it's gospel music or in the Arabic world, for example, like call to prayers, like music it's a human thing, like no matter where you are in the world or whatever time. And I think that's what's so unifying about it. We can get into genres, that can be a bit more contentious.
Sure.
Cool. But music as a concept, that's something that's owned by human beings and something that we love and we all enjoy.
And talking about these challenges with the industry, I remember looking at this was years ago, so I'm sure the numbers have changed a bit, but looking at basically the different creative industries and how much they're each worth, you've basically got, if you had to break them down into bar charts, you've got gaming on one extreme end, which is more than everything else combined. And then everything else is relative to that small, but also pretty big. Music's one of them, I think somewhere in the middle of those like other industries, where when you look at its weight compared to other creative industries, it isn't that big, but it's kind of big on its own.
Yeah, it's the cultural.
It kind of gets left on its own as you start to say. Why do you think that is? I know you mentioned it's like, it's just this like mental concept of, oh, they're over there doing their thing,
Yeah.
and so they leave it. But actually, if I think about other creative industries, it's like there are a couple publishing giants, but there are also lots of smaller publishers.
True.
You can also self-publish. You can be an independent artist, but it's very hard without something like TikTok.
Yeah.
And then over in gaming, it's again, there are a few big companies, but there's an enormous number of indie devs and studios.
Exactly.
And I just think, like, you're right. Like, music is in its own little world, despite from an industry perspective, it shouldn't be that different.
Yeah,
but it is.
It's very political. It's very, very political.
Yeah, that's the word. That's a good word for it, actually. It's political.
It's
like most of the other
political.
industries aren't that political.
No, you could just create and be free and, you know, just come on the block and create a game and it's great. And music, as soon as you try and do that, you're either acquired or stuff goes wrong. It's a bit of a funny...
Yeah, when you say goes wrong, it's in air quotes.
Literally coded language, huh? But it's a thing where it's complicated because music as a whole, culturally, I think has more power than some of those other creative industries you mentioned. And the studies actually showed that in terms of Gen Z, they listen to music more than other activities such as gaming or such as watching videos. And
always got Spotify when you're traveling.
Do you know what I mean?
You know?
So music in terms of activity is high, but in terms of the monetization of music, it's just been done so poorly that...
And this is what I'm thinking. It's like, I wonder if it's a mismatch of incentives. I wonder if it's a case of, like, with gaming, you know, the industry is so big, people pay for games and there's other, you know, revenue streams. With writing, I pay for my books, all the books that are on the wall next to us.
I mean, let's just look at the unit economics.
It's a bit weird.
Like, it takes about 1 million streams to make about $4,000 in US dollars.
I've heard this.
On Spotify.
Ridiculous.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And most artists, like independent artists, aren't doing more than 100,000 streams. So you do the maths, like you're not going to make money from streaming, which is pushed as the main way to make money in music. But anyone who's in music knows that touring, merch. So it's the non-musical side of music that makes more money in music. How is music meant to win if like it's all the non-musical, physical, experiential stuff that really makes the money?
Well, what do you think the answer is? Because if it's really a case of mismatched incentives, where in other creative industries it's a bit more of a normal business case of basically where attention goes, the money goes, and so that's where it can grow. In music, where the attention goes isn't always where the money goes.
Yeah,
and
it's
incentives got weird. So what do you think we do?
I think
about
it's
this?
a bit of that, but also just lack of understanding of intellectual property.
Okay.
Where as an artist, just to break it down loosely, these are like the old school deals, to be honest, but they're still occurring now. You're a talented artist, you've got a bit of buzz, but you don't have the money to, I don't know, do a full rollout, do the marketing, whatever. You sign with a record label. That record label gives you an advance, which is basically a loan, but you have to pay that loan back through your record sales.
Through success, basically,
Yeah, but as I've just said, takes about 1 million streams to make $4,000 in US dollars. So you could do great. Like, you could do 1 million streams. Well done. Like, we didn't expect this from you. But we gave you an advance of, I don't know, 30 grand. Keep going, mate. And then they squeeze all the juice. You've not quite got there. On top of that, that loan, by the way, comes with a bit of interest, or you might go into more debt. You might ask for a bit of a top up because, you know, song's doing well. Pay your bills, song's doing well. You want to just like do an extra push. You might want to get that person on the remix as a feature. He has a fee, but that's going to blow up more. So you're thinking, okay, it might be worth it. And you'll hit those streams that hopefully will help you pay it back. But then you're in more debt and then you're in a cycle of debt. In any other industry, this would be seen as exploitation. Yeah. But in music, it's like, he wanted the limelight. You know, there's a lot of that kind of narrative. People are quite scornful. Like, I think so. But this kid was 18, 19 when they signed that deal. This kid didn't have a proper lawyer. This kid could have either been a drug dealer or a musician. And he picked, on paper, the right path to be a musician, you know? So yeah, you see a lot of artists get caught up in a lot of nonsense. And I think it's because doing it the pure music industry way isn't pure. So then they have one foot in things they shouldn't, so that they're not so reliant on the label or whatever. And then they get caught up and people are like, oh, how did this happen? You know?
When you take this zoomed out perspective, we're getting a very different picture now of, in this example of this like 18, 19-year-old kid you mentioned who could have gone down like the wrong path. And they made what on paper is the right decision. Had they gone down the right path, someone would have manipulated and exploited them.
Exactly.
They went down the right path, and the same thing basically happened, just in a
happened.
different way.
Yeah.
And it makes you feel like there's no good option when you look at it that way.
I disagree. I'm always positive about it. So they get screwed over. Hopefully it's not too bad that they can't recover from and they're not completely traumatized. And then they set up their own label. Or they do their own thing, or they get money in whatever way and they buy themselves out of the deal, whatever. That's what we're seeing some of the older American artists do.
Yeah,
they
we're
get
seeing
their
a lot of
masters
them.
back and
A lot of them are starting their own labels.
Starting their own labels or
it's
leveraging.
happening a little bit here too.
Yeah, it's getting there. I think a lot of them, what they'll do is they'll have their hit song or whatever, you know what I mean? People know them or just know their song on the radio and they say, okay, cool, you know me for that. Well, I actually was always passionate about fashion. I want to start a clothing line. And then hopefully they can leverage that fan base to push the clothing line. Or, I like music, but I'd rather be an exec. Okay, they sign other artists. And some of them perpetuate, unfortunately, the same stuff they've been through. Others of them try and do fairer deals or try and mentor or try and empower the people around them. So yeah, there's definitely a way out. But I think the general rule in music is you have to get screwed at least one time to really understand what's going on. And these are top artists that, like, artists I've actually looked up to, artists that, you know, on Spotify, you're seeing billions of streams. They're literally slaves to their contracts.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen it before. I did a very small stint in the music industry, and I've seen it where, you know, someone gets, even if the advance is only like 10K, you don't know what you're doing, what you're doing there, and it just goes a little bit off the rails.
Yeah, loan sharks.
And what you do is, if you don't realize what you've gotten into, you see the numbers in your bank account that you've maybe never had before.
That too. And that's human. That's a very human...
It's the psychological just pull to spend the money, and then you go, oh,
what now?
What's now? What's next?
Exactly. And then that may make you go back to that life you've tried to
maybe
run away from. And it's a cycle. And I think a lot of this is deliberate. Like, these are very intelligent people that have built this industry. And it's capitalism at the end of the day, which works off exploitation.
So how do you think we change it?
So it goes back to my thing of education. I think there's a lot of information asymmetry. And luckily in the community and the people around me, and even myself, I do a lot of talks to try and educate and explain this to artists. Just ask their situation, not in a condescending way, but like, have you thought about that, bro? Like, there are other ways, like that sort of thing. Just asking that question can make people be more aware. Obviously, ego's a thing, so sometimes they have to go through it and realize.
Yeah.
But I think at least if you can try and put them on that right path or give them a nugget that they can go away and Google, ChatGPT, whatever they want to do, you've at least done your bit.
Yeah.
And also just be the change you want to see. So with what we do, we're not a record label. So we make music for adverts. So they're free, it's non-exclusive. They can do whatever they need to do, sign whatever deal if they want to sign, be independent, all of that stuff. But they would create a song for an advert and get paid in that way rather than just music streaming and relying on that. And the money they'd make from an advert is probably just as much they'd make from 1 million streams. So they can do it a lot faster in like a 2-week, 3-week advertising campaign.
Oh, got you. That's so much smarter. Yeah. So this is why I asked this question about incentives. I'm like, if one of the ways we change incentives might be just changing the source of the money.
Exactly.
Or at least diversifying.
Diversifying. Brands have a lot of money and they're begging for culture. And music is the easiest way you can be culturally relevant.
You're so right. Do you know what? It's like when, it's very rare, but it does happen, when someone like a Stormzy jumps on like a gaming
Adidas
track.
Or gaming or whatever.
And you go, oh shit.
Oh my gosh, he's actually into gaming. And
yeah.
You get obsessed and all his fans are like sharing it and it becomes like a movement. So yeah, I think that these two worlds, advertising, music, they're so powerful, and that's why we started this business, because we were like, we can disrupt both and help artists and help them get discovered. Like, there's so much talent out there. You go down Leicester Square, I'm hearing people that I genuinely believe are as good vocally as Ed Sheeran. Obviously they don't have the marketing, they don't have the stage presence, whatever, but like vocally they're just as good. But because music isn't meritocratic, they'll probably just always be singing until someone gives them a chance. But then that person who gives them a chance will exploit them because the industry is set up like that.
Yeah,
you know?
You mentioned like, you know, and as you know, in business, sometimes it's kind of the same of like, you need to fail yourself. The amount of training or teaching will ever...
Yeah, you have to go through it.
Yeah, you have to go through it yourself. And, you know, I wonder sometimes when I ask for something like, what's the solution? How do we change this? I do think a viable answer is we don't, or we change just a bit or in a certain way, but we don't completely get rid of it.
Yeah.
Because actually that weeds out the people who are dedicated enough to keep doing it.
This is true. And let me just defend labels for a sec. I didn't think I'd ever be saying that. But like, in fairness to them, if we both been in VC, if we look at it as a VC model, right? They might make 10 investments or sign 10 artists. Maybe one of them will be close to the next Taylor Swift if they're lucky. That one artist will make up for the 8, 9 artists that completely bombed, not because they weren't dedicated, they didn't record enough, but just their consumer product.
And that's interesting.
Yeah, it's consumption. People are weird, like things change, like that sound suddenly becomes less relevant. And then equally, I think with labels now, what they're doing is just kind of waiting to see what blows up on TikTok and signing it as it is on that incline, because it's like, why would I sign something before it's shown any traction? But then let me not sign at the tail end of that traction. Let me just get in there. Maybe I can sign a remix. Yeah, it's like a VC model. You want to see a bit of traction.
Interesting, because really what that means we're talking about today is like broken business models as opposed to one specific industry. That's really okay. So we're going to come on to VC in a little bit, but before we do, I think let's wrap up by understanding your work in and around music. You're in the music industry, but you're also kind of / more accurately in the marketing and advertising industry. So talk to me about what you've learned about people as a result, right? This show is me really trying to explore, how do we become the best us's we can be? How do we discover and cultivate the leader within? And ultimately, I don't think we can do that personally without an understanding of some kind of at least our own psychology.
Yeah.
And with things like marketers know how to pull our psychological strings. What have you learned about the way people work and our psychology working in this industry?
Yeah, as you accurately described, I'd say we're more a marketing company, but music is key to our values and how we unlock and differentiate ourselves from other creative agencies. So yeah, I've always had a passion for music, but ultimately, as I've shown, the business model of music is flawed. But the advertising business model isn't flawed, in my opinion. It's a bit flawed for the soul, but in terms of the way it makes money, cookies, data, targeting, wow.
It makes a lot.
It's actually incredible.
Yeah, I know.
Sometimes I look back and I'm like, wow. Just the way Google and all these companies, Facebook, have done it, where you are the product. If it's free, you are the product. So you're going on social media, they're feeding that data to certain brands and helping them target you. They pay a certain amount, and they get to benefit by exposing their product to hopefully a highly targeted audience, like a qualified audience. I think that is, forget the morality of it, the manipulation, whatever, that is amazing as a business model and concept. Now, looking at advertising, you are technically manipulating / positioning products and making people at least feel an emotional attachment to those products. Whether they get value from those products, that's a different conversation. But you're creating emotional attachments. We are using music to help people have emotional attachments to brands and certain products. That's what we do. Now, in terms of just the industry as a whole and what I've learned from it, the decision makers are the gatekeepers ultimately. They're the ones who make those big calls. I've noticed that it's quite short term, like the industry moves very fast. And as someone who's a long-term thinker, that has been a challenge, I'll be honest.
Okay. So when you say it moves fast, do you mean like advertising is always looking for the newest trend?
Just trends. They move so quickly.
Oh, and you probably don't give a shit about trends.
I have to give.
Yeah.
I have to. That's my job.
Enough.
So
Yeah.
I have to put that Rahmon's personal ego or philosophy aside and be like, no, we got to get on this trend and make a song that hits that trend. And we do it very well. We've had 8 billion views on TikTok. Our songs go viral. Our campaigns are successful, we win awards, we do what we need to do. The proof's in the pudding. But I think there's something wrong with the fact that everything's so far short term. And with something like music, where it comes to quality, I think that's where we stand out, because the quality of the music we put in our ads is so good compared to what's coming out, because everyone's just chasing trends. That's what differentiates us. And that's why brands like working with us.
The way you think about these things, you're very values driven, like we discussed.
I try to be, yeah.
a lot of organizations who understand these things aren't.
Yeah.
They're really just driven purely by the numbers and the money.
Yeah. They're profit
And
maximizing.
yeah, you're right, exactly. And as you mentioned, like the industry you're in, you're kind of playing the game, but at the same time, you need to put your philosophy aside. So how do you balance the two? Like, does it sit right with you, the kind of things the industry does?
Honestly, it's really tough, and I have my battles with it. What I would say is, at least to the consumer, if I give you a piece of music you like, I'm putting a smile on your face every day. So obviously some songs are super annoying eventually, but at least when you first hear a Loud Parade song, you're like, oh, that's kind of neat. That's kind of cute. Like that's interesting. So I think that's my way of giving back. Like, okay, I'm taking attention from you. I'm taking potential dollars from you when you see this ad. But at least the song you've heard is so fire that you're like, you know what? Begrudgingly, you know what? You got me. You got me. That kind of playful dance, that's kind of how I justify it to myself. And then probably the bigger way I justify it to myself is a lot of these artists are getting their first bit of money from music by working with us. These are like really talented, young, emerging artists, bedroom producers. They're getting money because of us. That feels good inside, like to know that because of a deal I negotiated, this artist who probably wouldn't have had a chance, who may have given up, who may have gone towards street life or whatever, they've actually had exposure with a major brand. They could put that on their portfolio for future opportunities, and they've got money in their bank account. That, I think, in the world of capitalism, and you're talking about I have this weird thing with being Robin Hood, like taking from the rich, giving to the poor. That is me being Robin Hood in a way that I can sleep at night. So there's that. And then ultimately, like, I'm a business person at the end of the day as well. And I like opportunity, I like innovation. And this is an opportunity that we see. Just to go back to why we started the business, yes, to help artists, but the business case was the fact that major brands were being sued for music copyright infringement on social media. So brands like Gymshark, Peloton, Marriott Hotels, the NBA,
all being sued.
Huge brands being sued for what? Music copyright infringement on TikTok.
And this is because music is such a
complicated
monolith with just these few companies. They have the leverage and they're almost very defensive about that money.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So you're talking about the labels. So the labels have so much leverage that they can do that. And in fairness to the labels, again, defending labels, which is interesting. It's stealing. It's actually piracy. So on platforms, if you and I, as personal TikTok accounts, use a Beyonce song on our own personal TikToks, no issues. There's like a deal in place between the label and the platform for personal use. But as a brand, you cannot do that. But a lot of these social media managers, interns, whoever it is at these massive companies weren't properly licensing the music, and they were using it as if they were personal accounts. And they were using it in the background of their videos that were going viral. They were using these viral sounds that get billions of views to promote their product without paying. And they got hit with lawsuits. And that's what gave me the idea to create a music creative agency solving the issue of music rights for brands, particularly on social platforms, but across all platforms, but also helping emerging artists in my network to make money from these brands who need music and they need authenticity. So it's bringing those two worlds together. So there's a strong commercial case for it. And there's also a moral case with the artist, but also a commercial case for the artist, because if I'm really trying to convince an artist, I'm like, good luck on Spotify, bro. And they get it because they know how unlikely it is for them to do well without a major record label on these streaming platforms. And even if they do sign a deal, in a few years' time, they could be in major debt.
If I was if I was a really small brand, how could I leverage things like the psychology, music, or just from your perspective, with your understanding of people and what's worked, from this view you have, this really unique, like combined view of different industries. How would I try to stand out? What would I do? Do I need to become a content creator? If I do, does my content need to do a certain thing to work? How would I do this?
Every brand is different. I think first is being clear on your goals and who you're targeting. And then second is being a long-term thinker. Like if it's a smash and grab, don't come to me. Like I'm not really interested in that. But if you're trying to build something sustainable, create a movement. this is the best time to create a movement. I feel people want to belong, man. This is a lonely life. It's a lonely world. Like if you can create a movement, you're seeing it with the run clubs now. Suddenly everyone's...
Oh my God, yeah.
You know what I mean?
They replaced dating apps, bro.
Literally. So, you're seeing that
Yeah.
everyone wants to be a part of something, So start a movement as a newer brand. That's your opportunity to tap into that psychology of people wanting to belong. And I've noticed, definitely at the beginning, people want to be onto the new thing. So something I've clocked in music is fans stop liking an artist once they get signed or they get too mainstream. But when they're like on the come up, that's when you get the most loyal fan base. Like, oh my gosh, we found him before he blew up. People are like that about brands as well.
Oh, that's a really good point. So you want to cultivate as authentic and big of a brand as possible without the brand blowing up yet.
Yeah, I think so. And then let those people be your evangelists.
Yeah, that is so interesting. It's just like word of mouth.
Yeah.
Provide excellent customer service, and people will spread the word
spread the
for
word.
you.
But that's a long-term game. You have to be in it for a long term. And I think there's this weird thing of exclusivity these days because in everything the market's flooded. So music, the market's flooded.
Yeah, podcasting, the market's flooded. Yeah, absolutely.
In music, apparently 33 years worth of music is uploaded to Spotify each day. So a person's lifetime.
What?
A short lifetime, but a person's lifetime.
Wow,
is
that's
uploaded.
A life sentence.
No, okay, that's an even better way to put it.
Yeah.
It's literally a life sentence of music is actually uploaded to these platforms. How am I meant to compete? I could be the best singer ever, but if people are being flooded with that, there's got to be another way. There's got to be a brand that you build beyond just the product of music.
This probably sounds stupid, but I had no idea Spotify was so big. Like we've heard this with YouTube for years.
Yeah.
Like some stupid number of years worth of content.
Yeah, YouTube is kind of intuitive.
YouTube.
Yeah.
But Spotify is so specific to, I mean, now they've branched out to other stuff, not just music, but
the core offering was songs, right?
And still is music. That is really interesting. So you mentioned a little bit about VC. I want to round up our conversation by talking a little bit about it because, again, it's one of these weird industries. You're taking this view now. I haven't thought about your career this way before, but taking this view now, your career is defined by being in these industries that operate very differently from every other industry.
Exactly.
Music's very different from creative industries, and likewise VC. VC is basically finance.
Sure.
But it's very different from anything else in finance. So this is painting the picture of your career a little bit. Before Loud Parade, you went into VC for a little while. So talk to me about why you went into it and what you learned, kind of what we would describe in business as being on the other side of the table,
Absolutely.
right? What perspective did you gain? What did you figure out?
Yeah, my time in VC was, relatively speaking, short, but really impactful. And what I learned about it really is it's all about people. And I love people, so that kind of helped. People are complicated, but when you get a person, you connect. Oh, it's the best feeling. It's like, I get this person. And in VC, I had a lot of those moments where initially you're in disarray. You're just like, why is this person so egotistical? Or why is this analyst so dismissive? Or, why is he not relating? Or you're looking at colleagues or whoever, like, why are they not relating to founders? But it's because if you look at the VC model, it's a numbers game at the end of the day. It's so ironic. It's a people industry, but ultimately you live and die by the numbers and returning the fund. So yeah, similar to what I was saying about the music industry and how ruthless and cutthroat it is, in VC it has to be like this.
Yeah.
I guess where it gets complicated for founders is it's marketed as, venture. The idea of venture is like, you're discovering, you're doing something.
Adventure into something.
The risk and all of this stuff. It's branded as Silicon Valley. I used to read all these books and stuff. But really and truly, I mean, you've met most of these VCs. Like, they're playing it. You have to play it safe. Your back is against the wall. Like, any company you bring through, you need to know it's $1 billion company. That is a lot of pressure. And to be honest, I think you're almost sold a dream that, you have to create this $1 billion business. And I agree, young people should be thinking really big. But having a multi-million-dollar company isn't too bad, especially if it's your first startup either.
Yeah.
So I think there's an education piece around that. But yeah, I got into VC really to understand finance, to understand business models, to understand monetization, to understand scale and what it means to scale and whether that's something I want to do or not do. To understand the politics of a board as well, and also to discover. And that's one thing VC does do. It makes you have to hunt and find founders and go to events and go on these WhatsApp group chats.
Yeah, you start to get a really zoomed out picture of the way, in this case, the startup ecosystem, so the industry works.
Yeah.
What tends to lead more towards the success, what tends to lead more towards failure. The founder side of the table, you don't really get it.
No,
you feel quite dismissed sometimes. You just build and you don't know why you've been overlooked. But to a VC, it might be really obvious that you're just not right for...
For VC funding. That doesn't mean you're not going to have a successful business. Yes. I think the verbiage and the no process, almost like an interview, the exit interview, whatever it is, needs to be better in our industry. There's a lot of ghosting. There's a lot of dismissal, and that creates this tension between VCs and founders. I think that needs to be worked on. That's bigger than me, but that's something I just thought I'd put out there. But yeah, I learned a lot about different industries, particularly media. Like I really got a passion for media and media tech and specialize. You mentioned gaming, all this stuff, like looking at deals like that, looking at metaverse type deals, you really start to see that technology is a beautiful thing, but it's not an industry. It's a tool that can disrupt every industry.
Yes. Yeah,
so once you start to understand it like that, something that was tough with VC is just the lack of diversity. I've really struggled with that. The fact that there are some amazing founders that just will get overlooked because of the color of their skin or because they're a woman. And it's like, why are you not seeing this opportunity? I thought you were about making money. But because of personal biases, like these people are overlooked.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was tough. And I did a lot of work to try and improve and change that. I know you have as well.
Yeah.
But it takes more than one person.
Absolutely. I think thankfully that part, at least in the States, is getting a bit better.
A bit.
I'm sure it has a way to go from what I've seen, but even 10 years ago, you could have over 24 partners, all of whom were white men, literally, not a single even woman in that room. And even 10 years later, it's, anywhere from 30 to 50, 40%, depending on the company. And, that's actually pretty significant change considering the time frame. You're right, though, there's still much further to go, but it does change. And this is the real meat of the question I want to get to. I want to ask you is, that affects who gets funded.
Yes.
Because essentially where VC's money goes is what we see happening tomorrow. If no one funded Facebook, would we be having this conversation about literally everything we just talked about?
Exactly.
There's a beautiful saying, where attention goes, energy flows. I say it all the time. Now, this usually is like from the mental, emotional, spiritual level of like where you place your attention is where your energy goes. Yeah. But I was moderating a panel a few weeks ago and said on the stage, I realized like I was moderating a panel of VCs and I went, if where attention goes, energy flows, where VC's attention goes, money flows.
Yeah,
because that is the energy that they have most, that's literally their job, is to use their capital.
Literally.
So if AI is really hot and popular, that's where it goes.
Absolutely.
What I really want to understand from your perspective, having worked both in VC as well as in something like music, which is actually very comparable to VC in ways you described, right? The power law.
And
the power law is this thing that we've talked about before, essentially this whole thing of 1 out of 10 has to return the value of the whole thing is what we call the power law. Both music and VC have the power law, essentially, is what it sounds like you've described, which is fascinating, because I've never thought anyone other than VC had the power law, but you're right. With the power law in play, as like kind of piece to keep in mind, number one, and where their attention goes is where money flows is piece number two, they're only going to be focused on things that return the fund, and anything else that doesn't seem to be returning the fund will get ignored.
Yeah, it's a distraction.
And therefore, no energy will go into places that are, as you say, a distraction, or they seem like one.
Yeah.
With that as the premise, what I want to understand is if you think VC is doing good things for the world in a way. Because again, if you think that the companies that are changing the world the most, like the Facebooks of the world, would we have Instagram? I mean, Instagram was built without Facebook, but would it be what it is now if Facebook had never bought it? TikTok kind of the same, etc. How much of the world, and that affects like politics, affects everything.
Absolutely.
And the reason I think this is such an important question is because this show is really helping us understand what it means to be a leader, to show up as a leader.
Yeah.
And so often I speak to VCs, and because I'm asking people this question all the time, I'll ask them this question. what does it mean to you to be a leader?
Mm-hmm.
And with them, I'll go, you're funding leaders. So do you think about it when you're funding them? And what they'll do is they'll do one of two things. They'll either reel off their investment thesis, which is actually a different question. So they're answering a question I didn't ask because they don't have an answer. Or they'll just go blank because they don't have an answer. They don't think about if they're funding people who are good for the world if you give them that money. People like having strong values like you do, or having a vision for the world that is bigger than yourself. Sometimes that's seen as a positive signal if you have it. At the end of the day, if it's not going to fit into this power law equation, it's a distraction. So I just wonder if VC is doing good things for the world, or if VC is actually creating more problems than it solves. But what's your perspective?
Again, super loaded but important question. So there's a few things there. First of all, just technically speaking, VC can feel like a house of cards in the sense of like, just pure, I'm a business guy. So just looking at profitability, or even just, if you look at a lot of VC funded businesses, fact check me by the way, from my understanding, a lot of them aren't profitable initially. It's kind of you raise, you get that market share, you build that moat, that product that's so unique, and talent, that's a big thing. You're VC funded, so you can, be a bit ballsy and headhunt that guy who's ex-Google, ex-Facebook, get all of that, like leverage that and put that into your company. That's something that bootstrap businesses simply can't do. Like you can give as much equity as you want, but do you know what I mean? When they can pay those fat salaries and bring those people in, that's something VC allows these VC funded companies to do. So there's like talent value kind of there, innovation there, they're funding that innovation. So that's the good side. But a lot of the time, because of that aggressive nature, it's not profitable. So growing up as a kid, before even understanding business, profit was like the thing that you would go for. But VC's telling me, no, we're not going profit here. Keep raising, keep blowing up that valuation, and we'll figure it out. That's very dangerous, because when it goes well, you get a Facebook or an Uber or whatever. But if you run out of funding, and we both know stories of people in our communities that have run out of funding, it's an aggressive switch. CEO's gone, co-founders are gone, hostile takeover. It can get very ugly. So seeing how risky that is, I think founders now know what they're in for. But I think before, particularly in the UK scene, when it was early, people didn't know. And it's just like, whoa, this game is ruthless. So there's that. In terms of like funding leaders, like, honestly, without funding or money, liquidity, I'll call it, not necessarily VC money. It could be angel money. It could be money from doing deals. It could be family money. It could be family office money. Some kind of liquidity. How are you meant to make a dent in this world? How are you meant to compete? Because ultimately, as a VC business or a startup, really, you're just an experiment. You're a series of experiments until you find that product market fit, and then you scale, which then requires funding as well. So I've had my challenges with it. I think with this business, like, open to funding and stuff like that, but we've really kept it lean, and we've looked at it more as like a model of agency first. So actually winning clients and doing deals, which puts huge pressure on every month to close deals. But at the same time, I can proudly say it's a real business. And like a lot of VC funded businesses are concepts that are raising with the idea of taking over market share. And then the other thing I found a bit strange, having left VC, is like the idea of acquisition isn't really rated like that. Whereas like other businesses, like you get acquired, you see the fruits of your labor. But with VC, they almost encourage dilution to the point where founders don't even benefit from that 5-6 year struggle where they put so much into it. They've diluted so much, preferential shares, investors get paid first. The valuation's crazy, and it's in TechCrunch or wherever, and everyone's proud, but the actual money in the account from the people that built it and innovated and put all this hard work, blood, sweat and tears, it's not really fair. So it feels exploitative, like music can as well. So looking at that, I'd say there are some good VCs out there. I love the Silicon Valley dream and model and approach, but it can be quite destructive for founders. We talk about the mental health side and, you should separate personal from business and have boundaries. How the hell are you meant to have a boundary when you have to return this fund?
God, it's such a messy situation. Because again, my desire, my initial reaction is to go, so what do we do about this? But I think in the exact way you've mentioned, it's this like multi-dimensional challenge. there isn't going to be a simple, straightforward answer.
We're aware now.
Yeah.
At least we're aware. These kind of conversations
Yeah.
help. Because when I first got in the game, people were not aware and they were being hoodwinked and it was bad.
I mean, it was really young in this country.
Exactly.
I mean, it's actually still
It's
pretty
still
young
as an
but,
industry.
you know, even 5 years ago, it was really
young.
We haven't really had a startup ecosystem for much more than 10 years in London, which actually, if you think about how much London's grown since then. Anyway, so I think it's that, I think the answer is that piece of make as much of your own money as you can and only take money to get to profitability if you can.
Yeah, I think
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If that means 100K of angel or 2 million of angel, but as soon as you get into VC, even a pre-seed VC,
it gets
someone's
a bit
breathing
dicey.
down your neck.
Yeah, but having said that, it depends what you want. So a lot of founders I know, they're about control or being their own boss. Well, if you're VC funded, I'm sorry,
You're not your own boss.
You're not really your own boss. That investor memo has to go out, like people breathing down your neck. But at the same time, maybe as a founder who hasn't raised, you know, your boss is your employees and whether they're happy. You know what I mean? Your boss is your customers. Your boss is your co-founder and how you're relating to them. Like, so everyone has people that they are held accountable to. I just think it just has to be healthy because that whole VC ruthless, I call it American because it has come from that capitalist,
from America,
very capitalist American, aggressive. We build, no profitability. We hoover all the talent in, and then eventually we IPO. It's not that realistic.
You know, it's a glorified, very risky, get rich quick scheme.
Very risky.
Which is interesting. Before we wrap up, there's one more question I want to ask you, kind of talking about this psychology thing, but really it's just your insight. So for everyone's context, listening and watching, we're recording this the day before the US election. You realize this, the election's tomorrow.
Oh my goodness.
And you were just there for like, what, 2-3 weeks?
3 weeks, 3.5 weeks, yeah.
What was the mood like over there?
Interesting. So the way I look at the US is it's 50 individual countries. I've had to do that now because, because initially I was like, the US is one, and I was stereotyping, and that's dangerous. And there's lots of stereotypes about Americans, some funny. Like, I find them really sweet, generally speaking. The ones I know.
Americans
really sweet.
do have an generally more optimistic and enthusiastic, I think is maybe a more appropriate word, energy, than the British do.
Oh, for sure.
Especially around business.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I looked at it as like, literally, I'm a superhero. Like, I'm here, man. Like, this is like the top tier place for business. And I chose New York as well. So living and working in New York, you wake up every day, you feel that hustle, that magic. Obviously, it has its problems. Like, we'll get into that. But generally speaking, as a young entrepreneur who just needed something fresh, and that's why I went out there. And there were a couple conferences and some big leaders and celebrities who are investing and doing all this cool stuff to be inspired. There's no place like it, I don't think. So that was really cool. Obviously, there's that undertone of identity politics and what's to come. What I would say is like the New Yorkers were kind of just getting on with it sort of thing. And maybe I escaped before the madness. Maybe I was in the calm before the storm. The weather was really good as well, which I think helps. I think there's a whole theory around weather and just how people are like, global warming has taken over there. It was like 25 degrees Celsius in the middle of October. It was
in New York.
In New York. It was unreal. So I think that affected the mood in a positive way. So I got lucky. Yeah, we're going to see what's going to happen, man. I think no matter what the result is, clearly we're divided. It's not a United States of America. It's you're this camp or that camp. And it goes back to what I'm saying about people feeling like they need to belong to something bigger than themselves. And each of the candidates, for whatever reason, represent something. And for one, it might be the taking back or the living in the glory of what it was. And the other who's pushing more like progress or like the future or like the first female, like these sorts of things, these ideas and narratives people really want to get behind. And what you're seeing is ultimately, despite the result, you have to live in the same country with people who don't agree with you. Is that possible? I don't know, given the current situation. It's very, very tense.
It's a good question. I mean, the answer is usually yes, but right now it feels like the answer is no. There's a book that's actually behind you called The Changing World Order. And the author, Ray Dalio, he actually kind of goes through how we go through these cycles of things are kind of calm and more unified and more peaceful within a nation, and then things get really tense. So the last American Civil War, or the American Civil War was an example of when things got more and more and more tense until it reached a head. And then eventually people became more united again. That's when you got the United States in the way we know it now. And the reason as a slight Freudian slip there of first American Civil War, because one of the things he predicts, and he's not the only one, I've heard a few people say this now, is like, there are some people that think that there's a chance, not a huge chance, but it's a chance of another American Civil War because they're polarized in a way that no one else in the world really is.
Bipartisan. That's the issue, isn't it?
It's just, we technically have that here in the sense that we have two major parties, but the British just don't really, fight that way,
exactly.
Whereas Americans, like if anyone, in a place where anyone can own a gun, you have to be aware of what you say and how you say it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You did feel that while you were out there, actually.
Really?
Luckily, I'm British, and the accent it gets you ahead.
It sails you through.
Yeah, it gets you ahead. They like
it.
Yeah, they
this
like
is
the
the thing.
accent.
Is like being from California. I've got, and California is very like Democrat, relatively speaking. How they vote, etc. There's almost no way they do anything else, and so that gives one very particular vibe. And it's just. Looking at the zoomed out picture of America just feels really strange.
It's uncertain. That's what it is. It's very uncertain. But I'm going to stick up for them a bit. I'm going to say that, as an entrepreneur, like I said, I don't think I'd be as ambitious as I am if it wasn't for certain US entrepreneurs coming from my Black community as well, like the African American community, music industry. Some of the most talented artists of our generation have come from that country. So I know people are kind of saying certain things, but like history-wise, they've done a lot of innovation. There's a lot of respect that I have for them. And in terms of business, there was a point where I was feeling a bit challenged in the UK, that people were shutting doors for no good reason either. Maybe just as like a defensive move on their end to protect what they have and like not being open to new partners, new opportunities, despite all the awards, the numbers, the network of artists. Like in terms of the CV, it's there, but for whatever reason, the British way is like anything new or different. It's like, no, you got to keep earning your stripes. So I was just like, okay, I'm going to level up and go to like where capitalism started, where business started, where advertising started. And I've come back and I've observed so many things from like the NBA games I went to and the way they do advertising there and the full scope of entertainment. And I've come back with new ideas that I think I can implement here, which will hopefully give me that edge. So it was a really successful trip, and I think I'll be going back.
I love that. Soon. I've had a few of the founders I know say this: when you start to get a level of success, it's like you kind of can't not be there, partly because of market and VC. But it's in a way, it's just the energy.
Yeah,
the energy is there. Is like you can
make it.
The energy here is like sit back down.
I know
until you have. It.
Yeah.
And it's like what?
Yeah, the UK loves to humble entrepreneurs. I think if you're like a VC or a finance bro, like you'll be fine. But if you're an entrepreneur, new money type person trying to make a change, disrupt, a creative, you're scorned upon. Sadly.
It's a challenge, man. Look, we've talked about a lot. We've covered a lot. As we wrap up the conversation today, I just want to kind of reflect a little bit on something I've noticed about you, which is kind of this like this Robin Hood energy you mentioned earlier. I think one of the strongest ways to make change in the world is if individuals, and that means as many as possible, so every single one of our listeners today, everyone in our network, ourselves, as individuals, can overhaul ourselves, work on ourselves, and give out this beautiful, loving energy as much as possible. If you put that kind of energy into a challenging environment, and it's so strong that it improves the environment. But you talk about the 5 people around you changing you, and that is psychologically correct. I also think it can work in the other way around, where you go and inspire whether that's friends, whether that's an industry, it almost like being like an antivirus that you put into a body that has a virus and the body learns how to fight it off. You know what I mean? It's like that. And so something I really appreciate about you, and I so respect about you, is you're like that antivirus, the way you show up. And again, that's within industry as well as within the communities, as well as, so it's on multiple dimensions. And it's just really inspiring and humbling as well to see, but also the reason I love it so much is because that's what I want to create more of through the show and through the work that I'm now fully focused on doing is, if more of us showed up as these selves who were being the best self-leader we could be, who were discovering and cultivating the leader within and really allowing that to impact our energy with that mindset, so many more people would thrive. And I just wonder how different our world would be. Talking about the parallel world where at the very beginning of the conversation where you didn't have the same values, what would have happened? Well, at the same time, let's talk about the parallel world where more of us did have more energizing, loving, and positive values, energy, perspectives, etc. To me is really exciting. And what I love is that we get to affect more of that world.
That's it. Be the change you want to see in the world.
Yeah, ultimately. Man. So thank you for being that.
I appreciate you.
I've got an ending question I ask everybody. Yeah. The show is called Lost in Searching. And so I'd love to know, Rahmon, are there any answers in life that you are still searching for? Or I should say, what's the most prominent answer you're still searching for? The biggest answer.
Yeah,
the biggest
I mean, purpose always comes to mind. But I think as I get older, I realize in this life, I'm not going to have all the answers, but I'm going to start to ask better questions. And I'm going to be more okay with not knowing the answer. Life will teach.
I love that. That's such a beautiful, simple way of ending things off. Thank you so much, man. I was telling you before we recorded how much I appreciate you coming on the show, and to all of our early guests, it's early days and the growth has been relatively pretty good, but there's so much further to go, always more work to do. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing with us.
I'm excited for you.
Thank
appreciate you, bro.